Today's episode of the DCAU Review is brought to you by Anchor by Spotify, the easiest way to make a podcast. When Liam and I first started the DCAU Review, we discovered a few different things. First of all, you had to have somewhere between Lex Luthor and Bruce Wayne level financial resources in order to be able to pay for a website to host your podcast. You also then had to have Richie Foley level intellect in order to figure out how to both edit and then get your podcast distributed onto Apple or Spotify. The great thing about Anchor by Spotify is that all of these things are available in one place. Everything you need to make a podcast is available all in one spot. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And when hosting on Anchor, it makes it very easy to then distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and many more. And the best thing about Anchor is it is totally free. So what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app today or head over to anchor.fm and get started in creating your own podcast with Anchor by Spotify.
This is Will Friedle, the voice of the future Dark Knight, Batman Beyond, and you're listening to the DCAU Review hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app. And remember a few things. First, Dana deserves better. And second, I am Batman.
In the year 2039, Gotham City has no heroes. Its people, no hope. Its youth, no future.
Evening, boys and girls. Who's up for some laughs?
Terry Mcginnis was part of the problem.
Freeze right there. You can't control your temper, and you'd better if you expect to get anywhere in life.
Yeah, I'll be a big success, just like you.
Until a moment of violence brought him to the door of a man named Bruce Wayne.
Let's put a smile on his face.
Leave him alone. Once known as the Batman.
Man, you're something. You okay?
Now, the Dark Knight will rise again to drive the shadow of evil from the streets of Gotham. Let's go! Supervillains, beware! There's a new Batman in town. Batman Beyond. You're pretty strong for some clown who thinks he's Batman. I am Batman. Justice returns to Gotham. Welcome to my world.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 216 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account. That's right, it is Liam. Liam, we've turned the page. We're more than halfway through the year 2022, and we are moving on. That means with a new month, means returning to a different series. We had a great month last month, reviewing our Elseworlds Boy Wonder Month. You can check those out in the archives if you missed any of those. We had a lot of fun taking a trip around the multiverse, but we are back in the DCAU proper this week, and we decided to take a trip to the future, back to the future, you might say. And we're going to be reviewing two different shows this month. Our first time really doing that in quite a while, but excited to kick things off here with a memorable episode of Batman Beyond.
That is right, Cal. We are picking up right where we left off. Of course, unlike with some of our other DCAU shows, we review all of our Batman shows in their episode order. And so we are back with the next episode in line for Batman Beyond. And that is, of course, a very memorable one, Payback.
That is right. So we are going to get right into here our review with our four categories. But before we do that, Liam, this episode that originally aired back on May the 13th of 2000 deserves its own official IMDb synopsis, which is, of course, brought to you by The Pod Tower. Check out youtube.com/The Pod Tower to get not only our full catalog of Batman Beyond episodes, our Zeta Project episode that we've covered, and every other episode that we've ever done, including bonus episodes available for your listening pleasure on YouTube. So check out youtube.com/thepodtower. And not only do you get our podcast, but some great podcasts from other content creators as well.
Absolutely. So this is the synopsis for Payback, which was written by Bob Goodman, directed by Kyung-Won Lim, with music by Michael McQuistion and animation by Coco/Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Batman investigates a mysterious vigilante who is somehow linked to a teen counseling center and wants to attack people who torment them.
Okay. That's, I mean, I think I didn't find too many faults with that. It's a pretty good one.
I think you could be a little more clear in what you're describing. Too many pronouns there, pal.
That's true.
But yeah, overall, I think a pretty fair synopsis, and that will segue us nicely into our plot category here, Cal.
That is right, Liam. So we kick things off as a young man is coming out of a store called Jeans Age. I don't know if this is one of those things where they had a title for it, and this was translated perhaps into Japanese and then back from Japanese to English. If you've ever seen like subtitles on those bootleg DVDs, sometimes you get the, when it's translated twice by Google Translate, things don't quite add up. But whatever reason, this store is called Jeans Age, and in Jeans Age, there's a young man that's about to leave work, and he gets quickly accosted by the manager of the store, who reminds him that tonight is his night for overtime and that he has to work overtime tonight. And the young man is none too happy with this and pleads his case. The manager of the store, an older gentleman, says, well, all the other kids are clamoring for overtime, so therefore maybe I should just go out and hire one of them, huh? And as he is sort of raking this young man over the coals, wouldn't you know it, a gentleman in a hood walks in through the front door and immediately locks it behind him. The manager assumes it's some sort of emergency or hold up, and presses the alarm button and tries to hand the cash register over to the hooded gentleman. And the hooded gentleman slaps the cash register out of his way and lets the manager know that he's not there to rob him. No, he's there instead to offer what else but payback. And he's there because the manager doesn't treat his employees well, especially the other kids that work for him. And it's at that time that he pulls out his weapon of choice, which sort of resembles a lightsaber, but functions more like a whip at times. So maybe an electro whip of some kind, perhaps, is his weapon of choice. And he begins slinging it around, and it looks like that the manager is all but done for. But thankfully, that alarm that he set off must have alerted someone that was standing close by, because from the rooftop drops none other than the future Dark Knight himself, but Batman.
Why are you doing this to me?
Because you don't respect the kids who work for you.
That's it? Because of some loser kids? You gotta be crazy. Like I had to say it. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry.
Too late. You should have respected the people you didn't fear. Batman.
Payback, right?
Yeah, your new ally.
Ally? What are you talking about?
I do the same thing you do.
Sorry, pal. Not even close.
That's right. And we established pretty quickly here that the character has been around for a little bit now, as we come to find out in the next scene, has already attacked at least one other person. And it's clear that he very quickly tries to make an appeal to Batman. In fact, claims that they're on the same side and are sort of doing the same thing by, going after the bad guys, so to speak. But obviously, Batman is not too sure about that, and that leads to some fun action. We'll certainly talk more about that in our visuals categories. But as they kind of fight to a stalemate, Payback drops this. There's like a model car hanging from the ceiling, and Payback uses the whip to knock it loose from its restraints, and as it falls, almost crushing this a-hole boss that Batman's found himself defending. Batman, of course, has to race to save him, and in the process, Payback's able to, which then transitions us into the Batcave, as again, we get a little bit of exposition explaining that this Payback character's been around and attacked the father of another student at Terry's school. Of course, the kid who would work overtime, also a different kid from Terry's school. So Bruce is already sort of seeing a pattern here, and he quickly also finds another connection between them, that being, of course, that they both are being treated at a wellness center, and so they kind of have their lead to go on here, and Terry has an idea of how they can sort of track down their next lead.
This Payback guy thinks he's some sort of vigilante, standing up for kids. The good news is I finally met him face to face.
But the bad news is you didn't stop him.
I couldn't. I had the manager and Drew to worry about.
Drew?
He's a kid from my school.
Really?
Another student at your school was also connected to Payback, the son of the man who was attacked last week. And the two boys have something else in common. They're both patients at the Gotham Youth Counseling Center. Know anything about it?
What's there to know? Sometimes people just need a place to talk out their problems. Some people, anyway. Is anyone else from the center connected to Payback?
I don't know. I can't get into their computer. It's not on the net.
Great. So much for that lead.
You know, we did do detective work before there was a net.
Well, yeah. Well, first he says that they need to get some information off of the net, which, you know, Batman Beyond is probably like, 50-50 when it comes to predicting how the future would, doing away with actual currency is probably sooner than later going to happen. So they kind of got that one right. They kind of missed on the cell phones still having buttons and not being computers. So they kind of missed on that one. The cars, we haven't quite made to flying cars yet, but I did notice that the police cars look not all that different than some of the Tesla models you see riding around these days. They kind of hit for that one. Well, they missed on calling the internet the net, and that's what Batman and Bruce are referring to as the net. So they can't get into the system to get any information on this counseling center where these kids have gone from the net. So Batman encourages him instead to do some good old-fashioned detective work, detective work in person. So Terry doesn't disguise himself. He attends this counseling center and decides to go in and participate. And it's very interesting because this is actually Terry being very honest about his relationship with Bruce. He, in order to fit in and not stand out by not having anything to share, he decides to open up about his after school job and specifically Mr. Wayne. So it's very interesting that some of this is based in truth, and that will be the theme that we kind of see throughout as Terry continues to get some detective work in at the counseling center. But so as he's there, he listens to a couple of other members of the group air some of their grievances, including a young lady who's airing grievances about a boyfriend that is mistreating her and cheating on her. And so as they're leaving, Dr. Stanton, who is the head physician and the counselor at the counseling center there, is walking Terry about to give him sort of a tour of the facility. And they walk past a room and they happen to see a larger burly man one of the resident geniuses, he calls him, which is a man named Howard Lewis. And then the other young man that's there playing this VR game with him. Hey, another thing that Batman Beyond got right, VR. That's a thing that's come about. So you see that for everyone they miss on, they hit on another one. So playing the VR game is Dr. Stanton's son, Kenny. And so Kenny is asking his dad to play VR, but Dr. Stanton, remarks that he doesn't have time in this moment. And just as he's sort of giving Terry the final little bit there in the of the tour, he's interrupted by a nurse who tells him that a Maxine Gibson is at the front of the center and is in need of an emergency, or there's an emergency happening and she's in need of his help. So Dr. Stanton invites Terry to see himself out, and this is where Terry gets to kind of do a little bit of detective work on his own as he sort of sneaks off and finds Dr. Stanton's office and begins to do a little reconnaissance. He does a link between the Bat computer and Dr. Stanton's system, and which allows Bruce to download the information off of it. And just as Terry is connecting and sending the download back to the Batcave, he is knocked out unconscious from behind by just a shadowy figure. We don't quite see who it was, but Terry wakes up not too long after that, and Dr. Stanton is there along with this Howard Lewis. They're both standing over him, and they kind of question him as to why he was in the doctor's office. And Terry says that he was feeling lightheaded and was looking for a couch. So he sort of weasels his way out of that. But it's at that point that Terry heads back to the Batcave and seems to think that he may have uncovered just exactly who could be behind everything, just based on some of the clues that he's put together.
Ow!
Why weren't you watching your back?
I was too busy watching my front. Am I supposed to have eyes everywhere?
Only if you want to live to a ripe old age.
You don't make it sound too inviting. Ow!
I severed the computer link when I lost contact with you.
Did you get all the files?
Uh-huh. And every one of Payback's attacks is linked to kids at the center. Each victim was a patient's parent, teacher, boss.
The people kids gripe about. So Payback's attacking whoever gets ratted on in that room.
But these patients aren't all in one group. So our suspect has to be someone who has access to every session.
I'm so ahead of you. Bring up a guy named Howard Lewis. The center keeps vid discs of the sessions. And this guy's a librarian. He's got the access.
But what about a motive?
He acts like a kid himself. Maybe he's decided to be their protector.
Why rule out Dr. Stanton? He's got access too.
You taught me to follow my gut.
Be careful. Your gut's still young.
That's right. He immediately sort of pegs this very large, Payback-sized man who seems to have a great grasp on technology. Immediately picks Howard Lewis as the culprit, and Bruce is a little bit dismissive of him, and not only for Terry getting knocked out from behind, but also for him sort of wanting to jump to conclusions, and Bruce is unsure, the lack of motive, but of course Terry, being so sure of himself, suits up and heads back to the center, where he's looking around in Howard's office, and he right away actually finds what appears to be this laser whip tool right there. In fact, it's still warm, he notes, and as he's sort of continuing to look around, he is attacked by Howard, not in costume here, but attacked by him as they struggle. Terry gets away, and we see a moment where Howard runs up to seemingly he's going to grab the whip and attack, but instead it appears phone. And of course, Batman springs into action and knocks the phone away, and they have a little bit more of a scuffle. But as Terry seemingly has the culprit dead to rights, Bruce informs him that he needs to turn on a vid screen.
Miss
television.
Yeah, they missed on that.
We really are. It's a really good tennis volley here between good predictions and bad predictions for our impending future here. But yes, as Terry turns on the screen, he sees a news report that currently on the highway in the back of a truck, sort of attack a couple And so Terry, of course, at that point realizes that this guy can't be the culprit, and sort of awkwardly apologizes and then excuses himself to leave, having just completely trashed Howard's office there. And as we go, we see that Payback is attacking the young lady and the young lady's ex-boyfriend, who had been cheating on her and had been treating her so poorly, and sort of taunts him by saying that he must care as little about this new girlfriend as he did about his last one, and really is sending them off to their death, careening off the side of a cliff.
Yeah, Dwayne. Protect your girlfriend, or do you care as little about her as you did the last one?
Thankfully, Batman in the Batmobile arrives just in the nick of time and is able to catch the car and save lives. And we get the good old Gotham woods as Payback and Terry have their second sort of face-to-face confrontation here. And they're sort of fighting back and forth. And once again, they're kind of evenly matched. It seems like maybe Terry has the upper hand, but then as he uses a couple batarangs to knock the whip out of Payback's hand, the electricity ignites some brush and some trees on the ground there and starts a fire, which Terry then calls in the Batmobile to sort of snuff out quickly. But in that process, once again, Payback has escaped. And Terry is kind of once again back to square one, and this time Bruce is just really not hearing it from Terry, especially when he points out that perhaps Terry gotten to the scene sooner and could have stopped Payback right then and there had he not fingered the wrong suspect originally.
This time, Payback was after a kid who was two-timing one of the girls in the group. He got away again.
You might have gotten there in time if you hadn't jumped the gun with Lewis.
I know.
Do you? You injured an innocent man. That's inexcusable.
And I'm sorry, okay? But I got something more important to do right now.
And what might that be?
Stanton. If Payback's not Lewis, Stanton's gotta be the one.
Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But from now on, we're handling it my way, which means taking our time and getting it right.
He's never satisfied with anything I do. It's like he thinks he's the only one in the whole world who could ever do this job right. I just feel like I'm never gonna be good enough for him.
Terry, why don't you just find another job?
That'd be too easy. He should confront the old man tonight.
You're probably right. Except tonight he's gonna be at that big party at the new hotel.
No excuses, Terry. You can't put it off.
Hey, maybe if he gets away from that house for a night, it'll mellow him out a little.
That old guy, from what you've told us, he'll never mellow out.
You don't know that. Look, I don't want to talk about this anymore, okay?
Yeah, that, and he points out that he injured an innocent man, which, you know, would have been interesting to hear Terry give a comeback of like that never happened to you, because you would think that may or may not have happened. None come to mind that I can think of, but I'm sure a young Bruce Wayne as Batman encountered the same mistakes. Perhaps that's why Bruce is being so hard on Terry, because he knows the damage that can cause. But regardless,
honestly, we haven't covered one yet, but there's a scene in Old Wounds that kind of reminded me of this conversation.
There you go. So you're drawing off some parallels that did happen. So Bruce says it's inexcusable, and Terry decides at that point that, well, Dr. Stanton, based on the information that they have, which they deduced that based on the information used for not only the victims, but who would have access to the information, that it has to be Dr. Stanton if it's not Howard. So He claims that it must be Dr. Stanton, and Bruce is not so certain. He says perhaps not. So then they decide that they're going to set a trap just to see if they lure Payback out. So the next day, Terry goes back to the center and is again openly complaining about real things, about how Bruce treats him, and that no matter what he does, he'll never be good enough. He lays a couple of breadcrumbs out just in case Payback is listening as to where Bruce's whereabouts will be. And that we find out that Bruce later that evening will be at the Vreeland Marquis Hotel opening, which a second, or at least a second, maybe third Vreeland name drop here in the Batman Beyond era. So Bruce is going to be there at the hotel opening, and as Bruce is getting into an elevator there, that wouldn't you know it, Payback does indeed arrive, and there's a little scuffle where he encounters Bruce right in the elevator, and I love that. I love that Payback calls him a mean old man, and Bruce just nods and affirmatively acknowledges that, and then he in turn asks Payback who he is, and he says, "I'm your worst nightmare," which of course is Batman's own line being used on him. And I love that Batman's comeback in this is, "You have no idea what my nightmares are like."
You're a mean old man, you know that.
Mm-hmm. And what are you?
Your worst nightmare.
You have no idea what my nightmares are like.
So at that point, that pretty much angers Payback, and it's time for him to take care of business. Pulls out the electro whip and begins slicing and dicing, and he chops off part of the elevator, and Bruce is ultimately sort of trapped there. He slices parts of the elevator and causes the free fall. Bruce begins falling out of the elevator, what's left of the elevator, only for Batman to swoop in and save him, thankfully. And the funny thing, Bruce asks him what took so long, which was hilarious. But then Terry responds, "Well, I thought he would at least wait until the hors d'oeuvres were over before he'd attack." But so this leads to our final fight between Terry and Payback, and it is quite brutal. A lot of violence happening there, a lot of batarangs being thrown, a lot of electro whip action, various different attack options. But eventually, of course, Payback makes one wrong move and begins falling towards the ground. So he needs Batman to save him. Batman swoops in and does indeed save him. And as he's holding him there, hanging upside down, Payback's mask falls off, and then underneath of it is what appears to be some sort of electronic or robotic mask. That itself also opens up, and it is revealed that Payback is not the good doctor. No, in fact, it is Kenny, his child's son instead. And Kenny is then hauled away by police, and Dr. Stanton is standing there with Bruce and admits that that it was his fault. He's owning it, saying that he was too obsessed with being able to help other kids, that he never gave enough time to his own son. And Bruce encourages him to go spend the time with him now. And they both head off in the police car, where we're left with our final little interaction here between Bruce and Terry. And Terry congratulates Bruce for knowing specifically that the plan would work, that Payback would indeed come out. And Bruce inquires just what he said, he being Terry, said in the therapy session that would have made Payback so angry at Bruce, and what he made up to do so. And Terry said there was no acting involved. It was all truth. And they walk off towards the limousine, and we kind of end our episode right there.
You called it. I put down the bait like you said, and Payback took it. Only it wasn't who I thought it would be. I was wrong. Twice.
Learn from it. That's all you can do. By the way, exactly what did you say in that group to get Payback so mad at me? You must have given quite a convincing performance.
Who said anything about performing?
Yeah, so that's funny little way to go out on the episode. But yeah, overall, as we wrap up our plot recap and get towards our scores here, I think this one's a lot of fun. I think it's fun. It didn't really feel to me there was a great. It's better to me because it's not really shown to be jury. We have a couple of suspects. It's not 100% clear who is kind of one suspect eliminated, so you think it must be this other person, and then it's a twist and a turn at the end there. That's a third person that we hadn't really even focused on. So I appreciated that. I think that's a fun way to do a mystery, especially when you only have a couple of suspects, kind of do the twist ending there. And I think as far as like the anatomy of this, that a kid was so angry that his father was too busy counseling troubled teenagers, so he thought he would take it upon himself to solve all the problems. I mean, it's silly, but also like probably only a child would think that, well, if I kill all the people that my dad's patients don't like, that will mean my dad can play video games with me. Like, it's a very childish way of looking at it. And so at the end that our culprit is in fact a child, it kind of works for this story.
Yeah, I think that the double swerve was the right way to go, because I will say it is a bit derivative of Mask of the Phantasm, I would say, in that it's sort of a tradition with the DCAU to kind of have somebody, and honestly with Return of the Joker also, we Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, where you kind of aren't sure quite who the villain is. There's this red herring that's kind of placed there that kind of is a big glowing neon sign saying this is the guy. But in the case of those movies where you only had one red herring, you really have two in this episode, and it's not even the second person either. It's a completely different person, one that you wouldn't obviously think of, because this is a big hulking mass of a man, as we'll talk about in visuals in just a second here. The Payback character is, and it's quite clear that Kenny is diminutive and maybe 10, 11, 12, 13. He's Matt McGinnis height. He's not even a teenager. So it does in your mind's eye sort of rule him out as a potential suspect, even though that the breadcrumbs are kind of there where you see him being disappointed and asking for attention from his dad. So yeah, I think that there is some good there. I think going with the choice to do the double red herring was the right one for the episode. I will say though, I think it's hard because I remembered right off the bat even though I haven't seen this episode in a very long time, I remembered right off the bat which one was that this was a double swerve. So it kind of ruined it for me a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, I think this is the one where the kid is actually the villain. So it kind of ruined it for me. So I don't know on, and we'll talk about that when we get to rewatchability, whether or not it still works after multiple viewings. But I think from looking at it just as a one time, the first time you're watching it as a plot point, I think it's pretty good. Not a lot of holes. I think that the dynamic between Bruce and Terry is interesting also because of the truth that Terry is sharing in those counseling sessions, where this is really his true feelings that are coming out here. He does feel like there's some measure that he will never reach when it comes to Bruce's approval, or that he can't ever truly please him. And ironically, looking at Bruce as a father figure in this episode, and not being able to ever reach those standards that Bruce has for him. So I do like that dynamic was fleshed out. This also feels like, especially for a season 3 episode, this feels like something that you would have seen in one of the first 2 seasons, because it's not a lot of teen drama, although the counseling session with the teens is part of the story, but it's not it doesn't take place at Hamilton Hill High and doesn't have like teen angst written all over it. So I do like that it's a bit of a departure from what we've seen from some of the other episodes from this season. So I think it has a lot going for it. I think that the action is really, really great. We'll talk about that in visuals in just a little bit here. But the fight scenes, you get 3 fight scenes between Batman and Payback, so that it really feels like there's a lot of action in the episode because of that, and because the opening scene is a fight scene, and then you have that battle in the Gotham forest in the middle of the episode, and then you have this this fight with the stakes, with Bruce's life at stake, and then some interesting props in this final scene here. I really liked it. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving plot an 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, so I also gave it an 8 out of just I think for all the reasons we've already talked about here. I think it's a fun mystery, and then the fact that you kind of have the real life frustrations that Terry's feeling as Batman, sort of trying to live up to Bruce's expectations, and him using those frustrations to then sort of bait the villain into attacking Bruce. I think is a really fun way of them, even though they're kind of butting heads on this issue, they end up kind of coming back together to work together to stop this guy. So I think that's a really fun element to it. And that sort of, there's that sort of grander theme of fathers and sons and mentors and mentees and all of that at play here once we find out that the villain is the doctor's son as well there. So yeah, it's a good mix of, even though the isn't like a huge integral part of the episode, it does still inform the main plot of the episode, and I think that's always good for that kind of thing. So yeah, overall a very strong 8 out of 10 from both of us.
There we go. All right, Liam, let's move on to our second category of the day, which of course is animation and visuals. You mentioned Coco and Dong Yang were responsible for the animation this week. So yeah, what stood out to you as far as your as the visuals and animations? Like I think I already mentioned, I felt like there was more action than maybe in recent episodes that we've covered of Batman Beyond, which led to a lot of cool visuals. But I'll let you go first and discuss what stood out to you.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, got to give a shout to the character design here for Payback. Really cool, really interesting looking. Obviously, we already talked about it in plot, and we'll talk about it again in voice acting. It did sort of, I think, evoke a little bit of phantasm. I don't know if that was the idea with the visual of the character, or certainly once they sort of settled on that motif for the story, if that informed this at all. But he does, it's all this character sort of dressed in all black, but just the white eyes and this sort of tattered cloak, just sort of covering its shoulders, and has this sort of full face mask as well.
Did you?
I think that's.
Did you think? And this could be just me connecting dots because of the weapon of choice. But do you find any Darth Vader in the DNA too? Maybe.
Definitely. I think especially maybe, and then at the end when the top mask falls off and we see sort of the circuitry of the suit underneath of the cloak. I think there's definitely some of that there. So that's a really good pull as well. Yeah, there's definitely some Vader in there as well. And as you mentioned, we've already talked about it, this electro whip, which we find out is like a welding tool, I guess.
In the final scene too, it's almost exclusively looks like a lightsaber. That once he gets up on that sort of panel and that he eventually falls off of, it's pretty much doesn't look like a whip anymore and is only animated as a lightsaber. So maybe it was that. Maybe it was the fact that he said, "If you're not with me, then you are my enemy," or whatever he says, which is a couple years before Anakin Skywalker says that in Star Wars. But it's a retroactive Easter egg. If you're not with me, you must be against me, or whatever. So only a Sith speaks in absolutes, as we know. So I do think that this gentleman has a little bit of Vader in him.
Absolutely, yeah, that's definitely a part of it from a visual standpoint. And as you mentioned, that first scene they're in, it was called, what is it called? Jean's
Age.
I guess it's a department store, but there's also like these like we said, there's this big sort of hanging car. There's some cool backgrounds as well in this scene, and I think the final bit where they're at this sort of gala, and but in that first scene, as we're first kind of seeing Payback in action, when Terry sort of confronts him, and he goes to sort of swing the whip, and Terry ducks, and there's this row of mannequins behind Terry that all kind of get sliced one by one as the whip goes through them. I think that's a really fun, quick paced action sequence, and then following that up with the bit on the car where he's sort of cutting through the top of the truck trying to get at the couple, and then he and Terry's fight in the woods, I think is pretty fun as well. I will note my one drawback is there's a moment where in that fight in the woods where Terry is throwing two batarangs at Payback, which is when he's going to knock the lightsaber out of his hand to start the fire. And for whatever reason, they don't do anything to really make it look things are moving in the way they usually do. They don't turn to like the spinning disc animation that we would normally see and that we see multiple other times in this episode. So Terry just sort of fires these two batarangs, and they kind of just they're just completely still and kind of float across the screen as one of them gets sort of taken out by Payback's whip, and then the other one knocks out of his hand. So I thought, yeah, that's maybe my one nitpick for that scene. But yeah, as far as that goes, the Batmobile swooping in at the last second to catch the falling vehicle and all that, I think is very fun. And then as we talked about in plot, Payback sort of systematically destroying this elevator, and then Bruce sort of pressing the button so the elevator starts moving, and then Payback sort of taking off the brakes of it so it starts to free fall. I think that's all a super fun sequence. And then maybe my last visual note here is that as Payback seemingly is falling to his doom, and Terry throws a bat rope out the window to catch and swings down to grab him, we get a very amazing fantasy Spider-Man as he's holding Payback and swinging there. So a homage. We've talked about this quite a bit over the years, I think, but the DNA of this show is so steeped in those early Steve Ditko Spider-Man stories, and it's always fun when we see little homages thrown in here and there.
Absolutely, yeah, that was a good catch there. Terry using the old-fashioned batarang too, with the new Batman.
Yeah.
Batarang shot out of his wrist on that one. So we're not the batarang experts. We'll leave that to the guys over at the Watchtower, the folks over at the DCAU Watchtower. But yes, the batarang that was used was definitely the new Batman Adventures style there. I also had notes as far as that opening fight at the Jeans Age store. I love the shot of Batman jumping off of the hanging car on the ceiling. That was a great prop, I think, for that scene. It's also one of those 1930s, early 40s cars that you would have seen in Gotham. So perhaps it was one of those that were driving around on the streets just decades earlier. So I loved that little homage to Batman the Animated Series there as well. I did think it was funny that in that scene also that Payback's exit was the Looney Tunes run through the wall exit. Like that's how he decided to get to leave and escape. And that first fight scene, it's not quite just his silhouette running through the wall, but there is just Batman turns and looks, and there's a big hole in the wall where he's escaped. So I did think that the Warner Brothers style of escape was definitely in the DNA of that scene in particular. But I
one last note on the department store on Jeans Age. Could be just a coincidence from the color. I think there's like a women's like pantsuit behind the guy register that looks a lot like one of Lois Lane's outfits.
There we go.
The red and black one.
Probably not a coincidence, knowing that the series, the same creators worked on this series, right? So probably a cute little Easter egg there. So that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I had the car actually going over the cliff once Payback has attacked this fella Duane and his new girlfriend. I love the shot of the car just going airborne, coming down over the edge of the cliff, and then cutting to the inside and the people inside screaming in terror, and then that sudden stop of the Batmobile catching it. And I thought that whole scene was done really, really well with then the scene of Terry dropping out of the Batmobile. So it's the first time we've seen that in a little bit, but it's a very similar sequence to the one that we see him do in the first Ink episode. And I think maybe one of the Spellbinder episodes too, perhaps. He drops out of there, he pulls the little patch and drops onto his foe. I thought that the whole fight between them in the Gotham forest was great. I love the batarangs versus the electro whip action happening there, and the way that Payback decides to escape is by inadvertently setting the fire and recognizing that Terry would probably want to save the burning house from above, so he uses that as a way to escape. So I enjoyed that, but also the visuals of the actual fire in that scene, and good versus evil. The fire is behind the bad guy of the episode. Loved that. And then I think what else did I have here? I did notice that two of the folks riding in the elevator with Bruce as he's attacked, one of them looked like Dick Grayson from Batman the Animated Series with a mustache, and he was with a young lady that sort of looked like the Barbara Gordon model if she had blonde hair, or like a dirty blondish hair. So I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if they just reused models. But either way, those sneaky little cameos by some of those other character models showing up in that scene were noticeable to me, at least. And then I think there's in that final scene that you mentioned, even though that they weren't maybe necessarily properly animated, I love the dynamic of Batman shooting batarangs and Payback being able to deflect them with the electro whip and cut them in half. And then there's this one scene where right before ultimately Payback falls, Batman jumps. He does this sort of front flip as he's attacking him, and then he lands right in front of Payback right before Payback pulls out the electro whip, and it ultimately ends up falling. But it's just this neat sequence that was animated of Batman lunging towards him. He comes up, he does like this really awesome front flip, and then he lands right in front of Payback. But I really liked the way that was animated and certainly drawn up there. So and I thought that the elevator gimmick was pretty interesting. We've seen scenes in Batman the Animated Series in elevators before, and this one where half of it is cut off and Bruce has to try and figure out how he can get out of he presses the up button to go back up so it's still somewhat functioning, and then Payback disables it and he's trying to hit the brakes and then it starts falling off the rails. So I really enjoyed that as a set piece also. So I really loved the animation, the way things were done in this episode. Everything's so fluid, and as I said, I think having 3 action scenes, 3 fights between Batman and this Payback character really added and made this episode feel just so action packed, and the visuals and the way that it was animated backed it up. And for all of those reasons, I felt I had no choice but to give this category a perfect 10 out of 10.
Nice. I went just a couple points lower. I went 8 out of 10 for my score. Yeah, I think there's a really strong stuff that we've already kind of laid out there. Even that scuffle sort of that Terry has in the art room with the videographer, I think is quite fun and creates this. They're kind of like physically struggling in a way that I feel like you don't see in a lot of fight scenes. It's not like a big flying kicks and kung fu, because it's just he's just like grappling with a big guy who doesn't understand why he's in the room with him. So it's not like your traditional superhero fight. So I think the way that was sort of laid out was very well done as well. So yeah, a lot of moments throughout this for all the reasons that we've already talked about.
Absolutely. Let's move on to our next category, Liam, which is going to be music. I believe you said Michael McQuistion responsible for this week's episode.
Mhm.
We talked about Mr. McQuistion a few weeks ago during one of our Robin episodes, so great to bring him back up again here in the DCAU. But a lot of great music in this episode. A lot of it stood out. I think the action scenes punctuated by it that were made it stand out. I think that Mr. McQuistion excelled in creating that sort of rocked up, frantic background music that it was needed to take those scenes to another level. And I think this week he did really well. The first piece that really stood out to me, outside of maybe the initial fight between them in the department store, is when Terry drops out of the Batmobile, and you even initially before that, where you have Payback escaping through the forest, you have him running, and you begin to hear the Batman Beyond theme worked into this kind of frantic bass line that was driving that theme, and then you have a sort of a distorted minor key version of the Batman Beyond theme played over top of that and sort of meshed together. That came through there, and then I think the theme starts to come in right when the car goes over the cliff too, and you have it kind of just drops out, and then once it reveals that the Batmobile has caught the car, that the music begins to come back in, and then ultimately leads to that other piece that I was just talking about. But man, some great music here, and I love that the Beyond theme was brought into the actual soundtrack, but played in a way that sort of distorted it, or isn't readily obvious unless you're kind of listening a little bit more carefully for it. But I thought the music this week was fantastic. I really enjoyed the theme in the final fight as well that accompanied that. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely had notes about the theme, and that the moment, as you mentioned, when the music is really ramping up, that bass line, and the drums are kind of getting faster and more frantic, and then the truck careens off the cliff and starts to tumble down, and then as soon as the Batmobile kind of comes into frame, you start hearing little notes of the Batman Beyond theme worked in. I thought that was such an excellent piece of music from Mr. McQuistion there. And then I think the moments towards the end there, even that softer moment there at the end when Terry is holding on to Payback, and you sort of see the big dramatic reveal as the cowl falls, and then that it sort of starts to hang back there, but you still have a little bit of the synthesizer brought in there, and the guitar there as that reveal is made. So I think a really strong job. And I think we talk about this fairly frequently. I think a lot of these Batman Beyond, there's nothing particularly wrong with them, but they kind of blend in the sense that what you're kind of going to get from the action sequences. They're usually going to be pretty drum and bass driven tracks. So the actual Batman Beyond theme, which I feel like we don't always get in these action sequences, I think was a really nice touch, and sort of added to that. And it really, the way you sort of build that dread of the moment when everything seems to be going wrong, and then bring that theme in when Batman arrives, I think is always a great thing, and something we see in a lot of our other shows, whether that's Batman or Superman, or even in Justice League later on. So it's fun to see that worked in here in Batman Beyond, especially when it seems like a lot of other weeks we maybe take different tacks with our musical scores. So for all those reasons, I gave music a pretty strong 8 out of 10 this week.
Yeah, I went with the same exact score. I went with an 8 out of 10. It's really good. Another one of those episodes. It's worth maybe even, and this might be putting the cart before the horse here, but maybe even worth a rewatch just to really appreciate the composition that Mr. McQuistion put together for this episode. But yeah, he did a lot of good work here, and put some good pieces together. So great scores from both of us. All right, Liam, let's wrap things up this week with our final category that, of course, is going to be our voice acting. One of those episodes where there's not a huge cast because our main characters are really just two of our normal main cast, but we do have a couple of newbies and people that are playing minor characters here. So let's talk about this week's voice cast.
That's right, Cal. We have, as you mentioned, of course, we have our main to play, but we do have a few notable guest stars and sort of a minor role playing Warren, who I think is one of the kids. Actually, I think it's the first kid who's sort of being yelled at by the guy in the department store. It's Curtis Armstrong, who's one of those guys you need to Google him, because I'm probably not going to be able to tell you. He's the voice of one of his friends on American Dad, and you know his voice, and you would definitely probably know his face as well. But a veteran voice actor brought in there as a sort of small cameo there, as we often like to see there. And we have Adam Wiley playing the voice of the kid version of our villain, although he really only gets the one scene, although he does have to kind of like cry at the end, and that's kind of haunting as well.
Yeah.
And then voicing Dr. Stanton, sort of our first of two red herrings for this week, we have Mitch Pileggi, who folks would know probably most famously from X-Files. And we didn't really talk about his character design, but he kind of looks like Kirk Langstrom to me.
Oh, yeah, he does. He's got the cheekbones and like the slick back hair. And yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, which maybe just adds to that, the feeling of these harkening back to some of those classic animated series mystery episodes. So I think he's pretty good. He's pretty dry and simple, but I think you're kind of trying to keep the voice nondescript, because the Payback voice is pretty nondescript. So he kind of talks in this sort of deep, calm voice for most of it. But I think it works for what he's asked. And then he does get that kind of nice final moment with Bruce there, as he sort of blames himself for his son's actions there.
Yeah, I as you mentioned, there's not a ton that's asked of him. He does play an empathetic character, because he does have to show empathy, and that obviously leads to the red herring of thinking that maybe, okay, this is the guy, he's acting on behalf of these kids, seeking vengeance on their behalf. So I think that the only emotion that he was really required to show, with the exception of maybe that final scene where he has to show some sorrow and some regret, is that empathy. And I think that it comes across very well. I do like the very introduction where Terry is supposed to be undercover and doesn't have anything to share, and he says, well, if you don't have any problems, why are you here? And I thought that was very matter of fact in the way that he said it.
He hasn't called me in a week.
You're better off without him.
How can you say that?
Dwayne cheated on you, Trina. Lied to you, too.
Dwayne loves me.
Will you say something?
How about we let Trina work things out at her own speed? Now, before time runs out, we have a new member to meet. Terry Mcginnis.
Hey.
How you doing? Hi.
Terry, why don't you tell us about yourself?
What do you want to know, Dr. Stanton?
Well, for starters, what brings you here?
Nothing special.
So everything's perfect in your life? Maybe you don't belong here at the center.
No, I do, really.
What's your problem, then?
I guess you could say my problem's not a what, it's a who.
So I felt that it was like, oh, that's kind of, having been to therapy myself, I think that's very therapeutic, very therapist-like, where they're going to challenge you. Okay, well, if everything's fine and dandy, why are you here? Like, what? So I thought that fit the character well, and that specific response was warranted, but mainly the empathy that he has to show is done really well. So I agree with you. He's pretty strong as far as his performance for this week.
Absolutely. And then our last sort of guest star to talk about here, we have a maybe and probably most fun one to talk about too, voicing both Howard Lewis, the sculptor and the videographer of the Crisis Center, and also pulling the voice as Payback. Cal, you mentioned in plot, much like in Mask of the Phantasm and Return of the Joker for that matter, we have the same actor voicing our villain and a different character who turns out not to be the villain. So a great little red herring, a trick that that Andrea Romano and the rest of the team there have used before, but I think it works just as well here. And playing both the role of Howard Lewis and Payback is a man by the name of Bill Fagerbakke or Fagerbach. Apologize if I'm butchering that. He's Patrick from SpongeBob. That's why we know him.
Get the heck out. That is hilarious. Virtually unrecognizable, though. I'm just going to throw that out there. You would not know it unless you looked up the IMDb or like, holy cow. I think that means that's a good thing, right? It doesn't sound like Patrick. So therefore I think that like even bumps up my score a point or something like that. Like it's because if he sounded like Patrick, it would be very distracting.
Agreed. Yeah. He's not playing big dumb guy, even though he's playing this sort of very large, physically imposing character, two of them, and for that matter, he's not playing it as like oafish at all. So I think that helps distinguish it from his maybe most famous voice role. And then on top of that, you have him really just doing a completely different voice, and I think he sort of pitches his voice up a little bit for this as well. So yeah, it's I think a really, really good job from him. And as Payback, he's very imposing. We already sort of touched on it, but as we get to of course our main stars of the episode, Kevin Conroy and Will Friedle, this where Mr. Fagerbakke and Kevin Conroy are playing off each other at the end there that we already talked about. It's really, really good, trying so hard to intimidate maybe the one person on Earth who just can't be intimidated by him, and it's a fun bit of them playing off of each other.
Yeah, I think that because they have the lion's share to do this week, and a lot of it turns into a little bit of bickering at times, and then as you mentioned, it is very father-son like, especially when Kevin Conroy has to play up the lecturing aspect where he goes into being the disappointed father and the one that's has to hold Terry accountable for his actions. And Terry Will Friedle's own performance, whether it's sharing his feelings of frustration about Bruce's disappointment in him, or the fact that he can't please him, or even when Terry comes back, and even after he gets this lecture from Bruce where he says, well, it has to be this doctor, and Bruce says maybe not. So he's trying to protect him and try and encourage him to not continue jumping to conclusions, and has to express that in the way that he's conversing with Terry. So what else can we say about Kevin Conroy really, and Will Friedle as individuals? But I think this is just another, if you need an example or another example of how well the chemistry that these two gentlemen had in both of these roles, this is a great episode to point to, because it's a different dynamic than just the Bruce shouting at Terry over the intercom type thing. There's some emotion behind it, and there's like I said, a little bit of truth when Terry is there in the counseling sessions and is talking about his disappointment and his frustration and how he can't please Bruce. So I think it's a poster board for a great performance from both of these men, and just the chemistry that they had between them and these two character portrayals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Will Friedle definitely gets a little bit more due, but I feel like it's been a while, and obviously we don't review the same show every month, but it feels like it's been so long since we had an episode that had something to do, where Kevin Conroy has something to do in this episode other than either give exposition or just say, look out, Terry, or something over the radio, as you said. So actually having him and Terry kind of come to butt heads a little bit as they are disagreeing over how to approach this case, and Terry sort of rushing in half cocked and wanting to jump to conclusions and pushing him, and then at the end there, as they have this one final conversation, and Terry mentions that, hey, once again, I thought for sure it was the doctor, and I was wrong again. And Bruce doesn't sort of continue to pile on at that moment. He just tells him that all you can do with these sort of mistakes is just learn from it and be a better Batman next time out. And it is kind of a nice teaching moment for Bruce after he was so hard on Terry for the rest of the episode there. So you get kind of your nice little closure to this at the end there, as Terry learns a lesson, and maybe so does Bruce, how he can best instruct Terry going forward. So we always talk about that. It's good when our characters feel like they're in a different space than they were at the beginning of the episode, and I think that the voice acting is a big part of why that feels that way this week. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving voice acting another very strong 8 out of 10.
Nice. I gave it a point higher with a 9 out of 10. I think that Bruce and Terry carry this episode. Obviously, Mr. Friedel and Mr. Conroy, we talk about them all the time, how great they are. But I think just taking this, the depth and the layers they had to go with, the truth in the truth that lied beneath the surface here, I think was really strong. And as you mentioned, it was very indicative, at least of the season 3 episodes that we've covered thus far, that didn't have a lot for Mr. Conroy to do. So man, how great is it to hear him have a large role in this episode? And big surprise, he had a couple episodes off and still knocked this one out of the park. So go figure.
And not it could be hard to break new ground, both on their performances and us talking about them. So always fun when we get a little something new to sink our teeth into here, or something at least that we hadn't gotten in a while. So that's always fun.
Absolutely. All right, Liam, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. So let us total up our scores, shall we? Coming up with everything added up here, I end up with a really strong 35 out of 40, meaning just outside our top picks score with this one. What about you?
Yeah, I'm a couple points lower. I think I actually had 8s in every category this week. So everything pretty darn strong. A final score of a 32 out of 40. So not much difference. Not that there ever usually is, but between our two final scores. But yeah, a good breaking into the to low to mid 30s from both of us. This was a pretty darn good one.
Absolutely. So I guess we should talk about rewatchability. I already maybe mentioned this twice, so I don't know where I'm going to land on this here, but overall, there's this character, despite coming back in the Batman Beyond tie-in comic, does not return to the actual series itself. So we don't get any more Payback here. Doesn't seem to be too much that is on the surface, at least, that is long-standing impact for Batman Beyond, and definitely not for the DCAU. But I will say that maybe this lays a little bit of the foundation that ultimately is paid off in the epilogue episode of Justice League Unlimited. I think the argument could be made, at least here, with as far as Terry feeling like he can never live up to the standards, and some of that little bit of that dichotomy, at least I guess, of the relationship between him and Bruce being set up here. So I guess maybe we don't do half thumbs up, right? So because that's even more of a cop out. So I guess 1 thumb up for this for me, just because it does move along the relationship and add an extra layer and creates this little bit of friction between Terry and Bruce. So I guess that it does move that along. So yeah, I guess I'll go with a 1 thumb up. And it's a fun episode. I don't know, however, with the mystery being ruined, as I said, knowing from the beginning who was going to be revealed, if it's as fun of a mystery plot, but I still think the action may make up for it. So yeah, I'll go with 1 thumb up.
Yeah, I think that's about fair. It's a fun character, and you get the fun dynamic of Bruce and Terry in this episode, and it's pretty memorable in that way. But as far as being super integral to the series or to the DCAU as a whole, as you mentioned, Cal, there was a very fun, it's Dan Jurgens and Phil Hester storyline introduced in one of the more recent Batman Beyond comic books from the mid 2010s. There did a follow-up to this story, takes it down, if you can believe it's an even darker path. So it's really interesting, involves a lot of the other characters. Some of the other rogues gallery from Batman Beyond are also involved there. So it's definitely a fun storyline if you want to check that out. So you can say there, but as far as our main DCAU continuity, no, there's not much or any really follow up to this, but still a darn fun episode of television between Mr. McQuistion's score and our great voice acting and everything. So yeah, definitely something to revisit here if you're just watching another series over again.
Agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget, we would love your support if you are listening to the podcast. So you can do that several different ways. There's some free ways to do that. You can, of course, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. If you want to go a step further, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star review. Apple lets you leave a little paragraph review if you'd like to, just to let people know what it is you like about us. That helps the algorithm on Apple Podcasts. On Spotify, you can leave a 5-star review. You can interact with us. We have some Spotify exclusive questions that we post every week. There's a poll and then a question and answer that we do. So feel free to interact with us that way. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/thepodtower. That helps us out as well. If you would like, that's a free way to do that. Like our videos when they're posted, subscribe to the channel. Those are ways to support us as well. More free ways to help us out. Subscribe to us on your favorite social media page, whether that's Twitter or Instagram at DCAU Review. You can interact with Liam, as we mentioned at the top of the show. He runs our Twitter account and does a great job. So we always love talking with people who listen to the show, talk about DCAU stuff and other DC stuff. Heck, and maybe even stuff outside of that as well. So follow us at DCAU Review. If you want to throw a couple of your hard-earned dollars our way, we're incredibly grateful for anybody that chooses to do so, especially in these unprecedented times. It's been a while since I used that line. In these unprecedented times. So if you would like to do so, a couple ways you could do that. There is a link at the bottom of our Anchor site and at the bottom of our podcast if you would like to donate directly, or you can head over to DCAUreview.com and head over to our store and get yourself a shirt or a hat, a mug, or a sticker. Support us that way. We love our supporters, we love our listeners, and appreciate anybody that takes time and recognize that whatever way you can support us, free or otherwise, we are thankful and grateful for you. And if you choose to support us in any of those ways, man, you are on another level. So thank you so much. But Liam, we're staying in the future, coming back next week with another review. However, we'll be shifting gears for next week, which means that's right. You dozens and dozens of Zeta fans rejoice as we'll be covering the Zeta Project next week. And let's talk about our review of next week's episode.
That's right. So as we've talked about, normally with our non-Batman shows, we kind of jump around and we maybe pick an arc or a theme for the month. I have no such creative juices for this Zeta show because I've never seen it before, except for the first episode that we've already reviewed. So I think we're just going to go in order with this show. And I think because there's like sequential storytelling, kind of like what we talked about with the with Young Justice last week, I think it would be maybe a little difficult for us to jump around with that being the case. So we're just picking up right where we left off. Season 1, Episode 2 next week, entitled His Maker's Name.
Say that title again. You cut out.
Season 1, Episode 2 episode is going to be entitled His Maker's Name.
Aha. All right. Well, you and I will go on this journey together and explore places we have never been before. So can't wait to check out that episode with you next week. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU review.
Bye-bye.